the White House press team can invite somebody who's non-credentialed. We saw that during the Bush administration with Jeff Gannon.
Right.
And I think that, we monitor a lot of these sort of fringy Donald Trump streams, and they've all been bragging about the fact that they are going to be sitting inside the White House press briefing rooms. None of them are credentialed, nor would they qualify for press credentials under these circumstances. And so I think Trump's going to flood it, even if he does exist, with his own people who will get the chances to ask friendly questions and drown out the rest of the press team there.
And these are voices who are so far to the right of Fox News, they almost make Fox News look mainstream.
That's right. They think Fox News is sort of in the tank for the liberal agenda. I mean, this is where they sit on the spectrum. And beyond that, I think it's important to point out that many of these voices, they're not really media figures, even right-wing media figures. They're not asking questions. They're really just providing platforms for raw feeds of Donald Trump or his surrogates. And we saw that during the campaign in October when he when he started doing Trump TV on his Facebook page. These are the same people that were behind Trump TV. This isn't media. This isn't even conservative media. This is propaganda.
So you're saying we could see a Breitbart News, for example, in the White House briefing room?
Certainly, and Breitbart, of all the publications, they're the only one that have actually put in and have tried to get and go through the credentialing process because they want permanent Senate press gallery credentials as well. But the other ones think that they're just going to get an override from Trump's team and sit in the press briefing room.
Now, what does this mean for Media Matters? Because, your founder, David Brock, has been in many times, good friend, and he actually wrote a book about the war on, it was Fox's war on Media Matters rather than the other way around. But a big focus of yours has been on Rush, and again, I know because we use a lot of your stuff, right?
Yeah.
On Rush Limbaugh, on Glenn Beck when he was at his heyday, and on Fox News, and the misinformation we hear from them. So does this change, this new reality change the focus of Media Matters at all?
The mission remains the same, but the way that we carry out will be different. And that's always the case, especially if you're 12 years old. We should always be adapting.
Sure.
And I think that over the course of our history, what we've done is look at places or individuals that are influential in the information ecosystem and that are part of really amplifying and weaponizing conservative misinformation. And sometimes in the past that's been Rush Limbaugh. There was a period where Glenn Beck was a big part of that, when Fox News was a part of that. And Fox News was a big focus, not just because they had a bent and because they were so biased and deceitful, but because of where they fit in the landscape. What we found is that a lot of this fake news stuff that everybody's talking about, we've been monitoring this for years. It's not new. The difference is that it no longer has to work its way up the food chain in order to reach a wide audience. Previously, it would have to sit into the right-wing blogosphere, these message boards, but eventually it would make its way on Fox and Friends, and then they would talk about every show on Fox News, and then eventually the rest of the media would start to pick up on these things, and that's how it infected our conversation. Whereas now, that stuff doesn't need Fox News as a gatekeeper in order to get access to a wide audience. They can just distribute it themselves because of the way consumption habits have changed and technology. So what we need to do is recognize where the gatekeepers are, who the bad actors are, and adjust our monitoring and work accordingly so that we can neutralize its effects or stop it from, really being amplified.
And doesn't Comet Pizza prove your point?
Totally.
This did not start on Fox and Friends, right?
Definitely not.
This never made it to I don't believe, the mainstream media.
No. In fact, and it's a perfect example of how this kind of how these organizing systems work, because what happened is that there were media platforms, some of which are allied with Trump's campaign and now his incoming administration, like Alex Jones. And then what they do is they would occasionally talk about this, but really this story was on 4chan, which is an extremist message board where a lot of white nationalists organize and other bad actors.
What's it called?
4chan. It's basically a community with no rules, and it provides total anonymity. And they self-organize there there, and then they moved to places like Reddit and Twitter. There's a community on Reddit called The Donald, which is where all of these conspiracies sort of percolate, as well as Alex Jones. Alex Jones talks about it. These communities then go back. They spend another week churning out conspiracies, and the cycle continues. And this is exactly what we saw here, is that they were building this story for months. I mean, it really was getting a lot of traction online. So for most of America, this was a brand new thing. But for a lot of people who overlap with Trump's core and most fervent supporters, this has been a story that they've been talking about for months, actually. This was nothing new for them.
In that in those that conversation, or whatever you would call it, was there any hint that this is something that people should take on as their own responsibility? I mean, any hint of violence toward Common Pizza to step in and stop this because authorities will not? Or did this guy who eventually did it just go off on his own, decide to do that?
Well, shortly before this guy took action, one of the more influential voices, who's sort of, again, a social media person, put up a post basically offering a couple $1,000 for anybody that would do an investigation into it themselves. So they weren't saying go out and solicit violence, but the point is that they were escalating and encouraging it. And this is the same pattern that we saw during the campaign. A lot of the smears about, where people were wearing shirts or holding up signs saying Bill Clinton is a rapist, those people were actually getting $5,000 from Alex Jones, who set up a fund for $100,000 for anybody that could get that message out on cable news or other major television. And the idea is it incentivizes, one, there's a clear incentive, but two, once they do that, it gets more attention. It shows that the model works. And there's this pattern of doing this where they basically reward people for taking matters into their own hands or escalating, or really what they're doing is taking these online activities and moving them offline.
Right. Now, I mean, to monitor these sources, though, on the part of media, it must be a lot more challenging, a lot more difficult.
Totally.
Because, I mean, who are they? Where are they? There's so many of them. It's not like you just turn on your cable TV and there they are. Right?
Yeah, and I think that one of the big things that we'll have to do is actually, in a way, get back to what Media Matters was doing in 2005, which was, back then, you couldn't record multiple versions of television. Publishing video on the internet was actually difficult. It was new. And what Media Matters had to do at that time was invest in technology, custom technology, so that they could do the work. We're back at that point now where we're having to develop our own technologies for helping us and facilitating some of the expertise that our researchers have, but actually putting it into these systems so that we can ingest all of these conversations, analyze them in a more effective way instead of adding another 100 staff, which would be one approach. The other approach is to do what we did in our founding, and that's invest in some technologies that's unique to our mission in order to do our work.